Good morning. Open, if you would, to Matthew chapter 7, and we'll read from verse 24 there in just a moment. Matthew 7, verse 24. It's been too long since I've expressed my appreciation for you, and I don't want to be remiss about doing that this morning. There are some things that I love about this church and the brothers and sisters that comprise it, and I just want you to know three of those things this morning that are especially on my mind. One thing is I just want you to know how much I love how you worship. I love how you see and how you celebrate the greatness and the goodness of God. And I appreciate not just how you do that when we do it collectively, but I appreciate how I hear you exalt the greatness and the goodness of God in conversation, when you talk about answered prayers, when you give glory to God for what He's doing among us as a people. The way you talk about that when we're in classes together and when we're talking about our work together and when we're talking about our lives. I just appreciate how we have a culture here where the greatness and the goodness of God is being exalted and being magnified. It's good for me to be small and for me to see how great God is. And you help me see that. And I appreciate that element that's a part of our worship, not just when we sing and when we pray, but as I said, just even in conversation. Secondly, I appreciate how you grow. I love to watch how you're growing. And I see the evidence of that all around. I see that in our young fathers. I see that in our young moms. I see that in our kids as they're coming to maturity. I see it in recent choices like Will's. I see that in our senior folks, the way that you're growing. I just love to watch people grow. And I know that's supposed to be a part of the kingdom experience. God expects us to grow, and He's furnished us with all the equipping so that can take place. And so I love how you're not content to give God mediocre service or to show Him a status quo surrender. I love that about you, and I appreciate how that motivates me to want to grow. Thirdly, I want to say I appreciate how you love. I love how you love, and it makes me want to love better. I appreciate how conspicuous, how extroverted you are in showing care to each other, how conspicuous and how extroverted you are in showing care to people in your world who need to experience the love of Christ. You've shown that to us here, you've shown that to others, and I see that growing all the time. And so I love the way that you love. Those are my top three, at least this morning, of things that I appreciate about you. And so I hope that you know how dearly Jen and I love each of you so much, and we're grateful to God for what we share in together here. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 24, Jesus says, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and acts upon them may be compared to a wise man who built his house upon the rock. The rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and burst against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded upon the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act upon them will be like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. The rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and burst against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." I selected that passage as kind of a stepping off point for the lesson this morning because I want to share with you some things that I've been convicted about recently. And in particular, areas where I need to build better, where I need to grow, where I need some good change in my life. Some of that conviction has come from just personal reflection. Some of it has come from what we've been doing as we've been contemplating the Gospels together, as we've been following in the footsteps of Jesus and seeing what He did and how He did and what He modeled for us and what He wants for us. And I don't know if some of the things that I'll list this morning are things that need to be on your list, but we've all got things on our list where we need to grow, where we need to build, where we need a foundation that's more solid and one that's less shifting like the sand is. And so these are things that I've heard the Lord say in recent weeks as again we followed in His footsteps, and they've convicted me. And whether you're convicted along these same lines or whether you're led to be convicted in areas where you need to make some change and where you need to grow, that's my purpose in the message this morning. I want to talk about 4 areas where I need some good change. And in sharing these with you, I hope that you'll hold me accountable for these 4 things. I hope you'll ask me about them and that you'll pray for me about these things, because in sharing them, I want you to know that these are areas where I really want to do better. Number 1 comes from contemplating a text that's found in Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9 and verse 9. At least this is an illustration of an area where I want to do better. It says, "And as Jesus passed on from there, He saw a man called Matthew sitting in the tax office, and He said to him, 'Follow me.' And Matthew arose and followed Him. And it happened that as He was reclining at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were dining with Jesus and His disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to His disciples, 'Why is your teacher eating with the tax collectors and sinners?' But when He heard this, He said, 'It's not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire compassion and not sacrifice, for I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners.'" There are a lot of things we could talk about from that text, but the area that I'm convicted about, where I need to make some good change, is in the area of strengthening ties. One of the things that Jesus was persistent about was about creating environments where He was connected with people and where people were connected with Him, and where real hospitality and where real fellowship took place. And those were outside of the synagogue, and they were outside of just being with the crowd, with the multitude, when He spoke and when He did things in front of a big group. I mean, there were intimate moments like in Matthew's house, and there was time that He was spending with individuals like Matthew that helped Matthew to decide to make change in his life. There was a daily walk with His disciples where they saw the way that He behaved and where they heard the things that He said, and where there were encounters that took place that were just everyday, ordinary life experiences where genuine character grew and where bigger faith was the result. And my interest in this text this morning, and in the area of change where I want to be different, is in the area of strengthening my ties with you. I know that people grow when people are together, and the more we're together and the more closely connected we are, the more hospitality that we show, the more that we're in one another's homes, the more that we share experiences together with those that have a common faith. I know the difference that those kinds of experiences have made in me. The kinds of things that have helped me, I'm not dismissing the collective things we do in the assembly or the things that we learn together in the classes, but there are things outside of these walls that, when we share in together, do something for our character and for our faith. There's a transparency that comes from that, where we get to know one another, where we live and how we live. And I need to do better at strengthening those kinds of ties. We moved to Chelsea so that we could be closer to you, but many of you haven't been in our home yet, and that needs to change. I didn't tell Jennifer that I was going to say this morning, but I don't think she'll be bothered by that kind of invitation or by that kind of commitment. And if she, then what can she say now? But it's an area where I need to do better and where I want to do better, and an area that I know God will bless, because that's the way that God grows people. We read in Acts 2 that there was a house-to-house relationship, fellowship that was taking place among the early believers. And that again is not a substitute for other environments in which we grow people, but it does say that hospitality is an important part of our growth. And Jesus exercised that with His disciples. He exercised it with people who were not yet His disciples, as we read here in Matthew chapter 9, with those that were publicans and sinners. Because there is just a way that when you practice table fellowship, when you're together with people in their homes, that walls come down. And there's the possibility for good growth, for good change, for meaningful ties that leverage and influence that God wants us to exert in being lights in the world. And I need to be practicing that more with you. And so an area where I want to change is in the area of strengthening ties. Number 2, in chapter 10 of Matthew, if you'll look at start with me in verse 5 of the text, where Jesus sends out the 12 on what's typically called the limited commission, because it wasn't to all the world, but just to the house of Israel. He says to them in verse 5, Jesus sent out the 12 after instructing them, saying, "Do not go into the way of the Gentiles, do not enter any of the city of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. Freely you received, freely give." An area where I want to do better, where I need some good changes in sharing my faith. Jesus intended that we would be a people who would not just have faith, possess our own faith in Him, enjoy our own relationship with Him, but that we would share that blessing. What He has sown in us, that we would sow that with others. And I have experienced before the blessing of sharing faith and seeing what God does with that. He tells His disciples here that they need to sow as they go. He says, as you go, preach. And so he's teaching them sowing as a way of life. Sow as you go. As you go, preach. And He tells them that the message that needs to be sown as they go is for people to know the reign of Christ, to know that He rules. The kingdom of heaven, He says, is at hand, needs to be your message. And what that means for me is that I need to leave a little heaven everywhere I go. That when I go to the grocery store, I leave a little bit there while I'm in the line. And when I'm talking with my neighbor, that I leave a little heaven there as well. That there is evident in my deeds, in my words, in my thoughts, in my actions, in the purposeful way that I build relationships with people, that I am sowing as I go, that I am leaving a little heaven everywhere. It needs to always be in my wake. There is an opportunity in every kind of interaction that I have with people of giving them a little taste of what the culture of heaven is like. A little insight into the glory of God. A little insight into what a life of faith looks like. A little insight into the kind of carefree existence of having a peace with God that passes understanding. Of letting them see what real faith looks like, even in the midst of pain. Of showing them confidence in answered prayers and in an unashamedness in praising God for how good He is in our life. And a confidence even in talking about our own weaknesses and our own need for growth, because that invites them to be introspective in the same way. Now, I know better than how I've been recently in that. Because I've seen that when we have God's heart, that we find His hand. That when we have His heart for people, and when we walk with His heart for people, then His hand goes before us, opening doors and blazing pathways and blessing relationships and giving us the wise words to say and wise things to do and ways to show care Ways to do not in a miraculous fashion, but in ways that are no less potent. When he says to the disciples that heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons, freely you receive, freely give. Do you see that he's saying that not just the message that they proclaim, but that the deeds that they show need to show the power of the kingdom. It needs to be evidence that the heart of God has been poured out on mankind. And God doesn't want people wallowing in sin and in its tragic consequences. But He wants to liberate humanity from that. So He empowered these men with a message and with deeds that were evidence of that. And we can do that with conspicuous kindness, with a kindness and care that's different from the rest of the world, with a heart for people that's unlike what they experience at work or even in their own families. And that is powerful when people see that and when they feel that. I need to do better at that. And I want you to hold me accountable for that, for sharing my faith in the same way that I need to strengthen my ties. Number 3, in Matthew chapter 9 and in verse 35, it says, "And Jesus was going about all the cities and the villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. And seeing the multitudes, He felt compassion for them, because they were distressed and downcast like sheep without a shepherd. And so He said to His disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore beseech the Lord of harvest to send out workers into His harvest.'" Obviously, that selection there could be used to make the point I just made. But I want to suggest it in a different light, and how it's convicted me in a different direction. One of the areas where I need to make good change is in the area of equipping the saints. And this is what I mean by that. That little section that we just read at the end of Matthew 9 is the introduction to what Jesus does with His disciples in Matthew chapter 10. He sends them out to go preach. But before He sent them out, He first showed them how to do it. And so look, if you would, again at what happens there in verse 35. Jesus was going about, and what was He doing? He was teaching. He was proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. He was healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. And then He sent His 12 out to do the same thing. He tells them to go in chapter 10 and verse 5, and as you go, what to preach and what to do as you go. And the point I want you to see from that is what equipping looks like. Because one of the things that can happen in a church culture, one of the things that can happen in our experience together as a body of Christ, is that we can do good about educating people. And what I mean by that is by sharing information. This is the truth that you need to embrace. This is the truth that you need to believe. This is the truth that you need to hold dear. But it can stop at just the education. So that we are a bunch of people that have real good book learning. But that's it. We just know a lot. Now there's another step to that that's an important step. That's we don't need to just be educated, we also need to be motivated. And so we can add to what we know the want to change, the want to do more, the want to be better, the want to grow. And to have education and to have motivation is great, but there's still another part, and that's a skill part. Sometimes I know what to do, and sometimes I have the want to for the what to, but sometimes I don't know how to, because I need someone to give me some skills. Jesus was teaching His disciples skills at times. They said, "Teach us how to pray." We just talked about this past Wednesday night in our Life of Christ study. They asked for skill. Teach us how to do that. And what Jesus is doing here in Matthew chapter 9 is He is modeling for them how to share faith, how to show care for people, how to proclaim a message that is humble and that is convicting and that is motivating and that creates in people the right kind of appetite, the right kind of perspective about God. And so He's giving them a how-to. And part of why He's spending time with the 12 and why He's in the home of Matthew is because it's in that kind of environment when you're with people and when you're doing ordinary things and when you're encountering publicans and sinners, it's in those kinds of settings that they can watch what He does and learn from what He does and then know what it looks like so that they can put it into practice in their own life. Now I think we're making progress as a people in equipping saints. But one of the areas where I want to make change is to be more purposeful in that. Not just providing knowledge and not just providing motivation, but creating situations where we can get more how-to go along with our what-to and to go along with our want-to. Now, I'm not prepared to say today how that needs to happen. I'm just prepared to say that that's one of my prayers for us as a people, is that we not only provide knowledge and motivation, but that we also provide skill, that we grow our skill so that God can do more with us as a people, so that we can be better equipped. Because if we fill up the knowledge gap and if we fill up the motivation gap, but we don't fill up the skill gap, then you end up with frustrated people that know what to do and they want to do it, but they don't know how to start. And all that does is make us feel guilty and frustrated when we don't know how. And so I'm prayerful that God will help us to find and to be better about the how-to part. The fourth thing that I want to say to you this morning is illustrated by the Lord in Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4 and verse 1. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. And the tempter came to him and said, "If you're the Son of God, command these stones become bread." But Jesus answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." One of the areas where I want to do better is in having an answer for Satan. Because I tell you, that's where he gets us all the time, is in creating in our heart some kind of dissatisfaction, some kind of discontentment with what God is doing with us, or how God is either blessing or burdening us, or creating some kind of appetite that is illegitimate. And he is always doing that. If we're not sowing, you can be sure that he is sowing, and he is sowing right in our front yard. And I mean right in our living room, and right in our bedroom, and just wherever it is, right in our cubicle at work. He's sowing all the time. And what he is always sowing is lies, because he is the father of lies. He is the father of deception. And so he's always suggesting things to cultivate some kind of dissatisfaction in us. You're the Son of God? What are you doing out here in the desert? You're the Son of God? What are you doing without anything to eat? And you're doing it for those sorry people that don't care a whit about you, who are going to put you to death? Is that the way the Son of God ought to behave? You're not the Son of God. Show me, prove to me that you're the Son of God. Do something. And the kinds of deceptions that he's trying to sow here are the kinds of deceptions that he's going to continue to sow in the life of the Savior. I've got to have an answer when he lies to me. I've got to tell the truth with the thing that he says to me that is a lie and that I know is a lie. And if I entertain the lie, he is going to make it sound good. He's going to make it sound attractive. He's going to make it sound fulfilling. And I have got to be prompt. I've got to be convicted. I've got to be articulate in my answers. One of the best things that I've done to help my heart in the past is to write down is to, and I mean write it down, to write down the thing that Satan has said to me, the thing that I'm saying to myself that is not true, and then to offer an argument against it. To state the lie, and then to state the truth that I know from God that is the answer to that. And that practice has helped me before. But I haven't practiced that recently, and I need to practice that more. Otherwise, I find myself in a vulnerable place. Otherwise, I find myself tending down a path that is not a purposeful one. And so I need to have an answer for him. And I need to recite my answers. I need to be articulate in my answers. I need to write my answers down so that I'm armed for when I face him alone. Because there are going to be those moments when there's nobody looking, when there's nobody around, where it's just me and him, toe to toe. And I need to be equipped with an answer. And nobody can give me their answers. I've got to have my answers from God for what I say to him in those moments. Answers that I believe, that I'm convicted about, that I know are true and solid. Because if they're somebody else's answers, if they're not ones that I'm convicted about, if they're not ones that I own, then I won't find myself equipped for those moments. Jesus was ready to face Satan, to face the devil, because he prepared himself for that contest with him in the desert. And I need to be prepared in the same way. So those are areas where I need to build, where I need a stabler foundation, where I need a more solid footing. I want to strengthen my ties to you. That means hospitality. That means us being together outside of here. I want to be better about sharing my faith so that I leave a little heaven everywhere I go. I want to do better about equipping the saints so that we are experiencing not just knowledge and motivation, but so that our skill is being grown as a people. Because I know that that's God's purpose for the local church. And I want to be changed in the area of answering Satan, because I'm going to face him tomorrow. I'm going to face him today. And I need an answer for the lies that he'll tell when we meet each other in the wilderness. Where are your areas for change? What's your list? You can borrow some of these if you like, but I expect that you have other areas that are your areas where you need to grow. And I hope that by sharing this, perhaps it's convicted you to make that list and to think about where you need good change to. Will you pray for me in these areas? Will you challenge me in them? Will you hold me accountable? And I really mean that. I really am inviting you to say, well, how are you doing on answering Satan? How are you doing with sharing your faith? I hadn't been to your house yet. When are you and Jen going to have me over? Hold me accountable for that, because I need that. We all do. And that's a part of God's purpose for us as a people, is it not? I mean, we're here to be held accountable, right? We come before his throne with people that share our conviction, that share our allegiance to the great God that we serve. And if you all don't help me grow and change, there's not anyone in my world to do that. And I owe you that same kind of commitment, that same kind of conviction, that will help each other be more for God. If we can help you with making some change in your life this morning, then we're going to sing together to encourage that, and we're going to pray together if such is your need this hour. And if it's time for you to own Christ, to put him on in baptism, then we want to celebrate that together, not just with you, but with heaven's angels as well, because we know that all of heaven stops to witness one that surrenders their allegiance and their soul to God. And so we invite you to that kind of change this morning as together we stand and as we sing.